In today's episode, we're going to do another junior code review. I'll be sharing 6 tips that will hopefully help you improve your code in a future project. Hey guys, I'm Dan and this is Pixel Fix. I'm here to hopefully help you improve your code a little by pointing out common mistakes junior developers tend to make. If you like these kinds of videos and you find them useful and you would like to see more, please remember to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you don't miss out when I upload more content like this. Okay, let's jump straight in and look at the project. It's a basic job portal website where you've got your profile, you can upload resumes, you got cover letters, typical things you would see in a job portal website. Now, if we click through some of the menus, we'll see that the website it's not populated with any data. Everything is empty. Now, this brings me to my very first important tip regarding the presentation of your project. If you provide your code or your project to someone, either for a code review or for an interview, please make sure you include dummy data in your project so that your reviewer can view the project with full functionality. Also, please make sure you include installation instructions for your project. Otherwise, your reviewer might need to spend 10-15 minutes in order to troubleshoot if anything goes wrong while they set up your project. Okay, so back in VS Code, if I look at the routes file, I can already see there's a few things that's a big no-no. Okay, so the first thing I can see is naming conventions. The method names are not written using the standard CRUD naming conventions. Now, the second thing I can see here is the way the controllers are being called. In this route, for instance, the controller is called just by the class name, which is imported at the top. And in this section, it's called using the whole namespace. Now, this brings me to my second important tip regarding your project is consistency. Make sure you're consistent all throughout your project. If you decide to use one way of calling classes, be consistent throughout your project. And that not only counts for importing classes, it also counts for everything else in your project, from your method names to your route names to your file names. Be consistent throughout your project. It's very important. Okay, so let's go ahead and refactor the job application route and method. Okay, so if we look at this route, we can see the job is being passed in via the slug. And if we look at the actual method, we receive the slug and then we do a search on the job and find it via slug. Okay, so what we can do here is we can basically use Laravel's route model binding and say that we want the job, but we want to let it search via the slug. Now, back in our controller, we have to type hint the job, and we're not going to receive the slug anymore, but we're going to receive the actual job. And then we can go ahead and remove this whole line of code. Okay, so next what we can do is we can remove the validation into a separate validation form request. Let's create one, PHP artisan make request, and we'll call it store job application request. Now if we search for our store job application request, and let's just clean up this code a little, and we type in our return type, which is boolean, and by default we change this to true because we're not doing any validation, authorization in this request. All right, and then the rules would be an return type of an array, and then we just copy in our rules that we've copied from the controller, and then back in our controller, instead of the default request class, we can now ask Laravel to inject the store job application request. Now we can remove this line of code as well. Okay, so next what we can do is, because we want to follow the standard CRUD naming conventions, we're going to take this method and place it in its own controller. So let's make a controller called PHP artisan make controller, and we'll call it job application controller. Right, and then we remove this whole method, and we place it in our job application controller. And now, because this is a method where we create a job application, we can call it store. And let's just import all our classes. Okay, so back in our routes file, we can just basically import our new controller. It's the job applications controller, and we're calling the store method on it. This is personal preference, but I like to include my controllers with just the controller class name instead of the whole namespace. But like I said, there's personal preference, there's no right or wrong answer. Okay, so back in our job application controller, we can clean up this section a little bit more. We can utilize the job applications relationship that has been set up on the user's model. And we can do this by extracting the user from the request. And then we call the job applications relationship, and then we invoke the function or the method. And then on the job applications method, we call the create method, and then we pass in our required fields, which would be the job ID, the cover letter, and resume ID. And let's just clean this up. Now, looking through the code, I found a lot of places where default templates have been used, but all the unused methods are still present in these classes. Like for instance, in this policy, there's unused methods. In this policy, there's a whole heap of unused methods. Now, this brings me to my third important tip about your project. Clean up the code when you're finished. Make sure you remove all unused methods. Okay, so there's one more method I want to refactor in this code review, and that is the create job method. Okay, so in our routes file, we will rename it to store because we want to follow the CRUD naming convention. Then in our actual controller, we'll rename this to store. We will extract our validation rules into a separate form request, PHP artisan make request, and we can say store job request. We find the store job request. Let's clean this up. Type in our return types. Make this to true. We want to return an array, and then we paste in our validation rules. Let me just paste it in correctly. Okay, there we go. Okay, now back in our controller, we can say we want the store job request. Then we can remove this line. Okay, so something I noticed down here is the job gets created, it gets saved, then the slug gets changed, and then the job gets saved again. Okay, so if we're going to clean up this method, we're going to make sure that we're not going to set the slug when the job gets created. And in order to do that, we just need to go into the migration. On the slug field, we need to make it nullable. That way, we can remove this section and not set the slug on the job create. However, we will set the slug in this case, but after the job is created. And this seems like a perfect way or a perfect place to use an observer. So let's create an observer with PHP artisan make observer, and we'll call it job observer. Okay, and we register our observer in the event service provider. In the boot method, we'll call the job, we call the model, and then we say observe, and then we're going to pass it in the observer, which would be the job observer class. Okay, now in our observer class, we're looking for the method created, which is this first one, which is basically this will be invoked every single time a job gets created. Okay, and now what we can do is we can basically take this line of code where you set the slug, and we can just basically paste it in to our observer. And what we just need to do is we need to, instead of the slug, because the slug doesn't exist, we're going to use the title, and then we're just going to wrap it in the string helper, and we're going to call the slug method on it. And we just need to make sure we import it. We can say use illuminate support string helper, and then we just call the job save method. Okay, let's just clean up this observer. We're going to return void, and we're not using any of the other methods, so yes, let's remove all of them, making our observer a lot cleaner. Now back in our controller, we can basically remove these two lines as well. Okay, so the last thing we can do to refactor this method is to reduce these lines of code by starting with dependency injection and asking Laravel to inject a job for us, like so. And then we can remove this line. Then we can make sure that all these properties, like the company ID, user ID, title, are within the fillable property of the model. And seeing that they are, now back in our controller, we can basically remove these, and then we can get the user from our request, and then we can call the jobs relationship and invoke the method, and then call the create method on it, and then we're going to pass in our request validated information. Now the validated method will only return the fields specified in your request, meaning it will only return these fields. So you don't have to worry about any extra fields being injected in your create method. And actually we don't even need our job in this case, so we can just remove it, and that should be it. It should work exactly the same as before. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. And I really hope this was informative. And if you learned something new today, I would love to hear about it. So please drop me a comment down below. And if you like this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. And remember to turn on the notifications. Until the next video, guys. See you later.